This class is concerned with experiential learning. Now, this is a form of learning that's very important in the context of business and management. The original idea was put forward by David Kolb in 1984. Here it's suggested by him that learning is the process whereby knowledge is created through the transformation of experience. So we take our experiences and we transform our experiences into knowledge. We do this in various steps. We have an experience, we think about the experience, we try to understand the experience, and then we file it away in our heads, or we record it in some way. And when we encounter similar situations in the future, we draw on that experience. In a nutshell, that is the approach that's been suggested here. Kolb's theory on experiential learning builds on experiential work of Lewin, Piaget, Dewey, and so on. There have been many writers in the area, and what Kolb did was to, in a sense, make this accessible in the context of business and management. Make it accessible, make it straightforward, so that we can see it working in our everyday lives. It's not an obscure topic confined to psychologists. It's not an obscure topic that is filed away in libraries or in laboratories or wherever. This is a style of learning that we have access to and we can understand. We know the importance of experience, and this brings experience and knowledge together. So it's a very important contribution. The notion of experience is fundamental to the model. What we're trying to do is to look at our experiences and extract from the experiences the core learning. What did we learn from the experience? And then save it, because that is what is added to our body of knowledge. The theory introduces a unique perspective on how we learn and interpret information. It's not learning from books, it's learning from doing. It's learning from interacting with others. It's learning from finding ourselves in situations and solving problems. So it's a more active form of learning in some respects. We are looking for experiences and we are learning from the experiences. The model explains the importance of experience and how this experience allows individuals to develop a deep and sustained learning. Somehow, when we learn from experience, according to this view, it's a much deeper form of learning. We truly understand the situation because we have experienced it. Whereas if we read it in a book, it's a much lighter form of experience. We get insights from the book, and books certainly add to our knowledge, but it doesn't have the same impact as if we experienced it. It's if we did it and we were actively involved and got the experience that way. The model emphasizes the need for lived experience. So this is something we experience by doing, as I said earlier. And the lived experience gives us the experience. That's where we get it from. We get it from undertaking a project or trying to solve a particular problem, and out of this actual real life experience we extract the core, which is our experience of the situation. So in a sense, we've moved from the very practical to a more conceptual way of looking at the experience. We're now in the process of analyzing the experience, thinking about the experience. We're making sense of the experience. We're trying to see what happened. We've had a lived experience. We've now in the process of thinking about it, trying to understand what was the experience, what happened exactly. And then we start to reflect on the experience. We start to think back about it. And in a sense, reflection is an automatic process. It's within us all. We have an experience, and in a quiet moment we start to think back. What happened then? How did it work? How did we solve the problem, and why did it work? And what was the situation? What caused it in the first place? We'd think about the problem. And I suppose in that sense, work does not stop when we go home. When we have experiences at work, we take them home with us because they are a part of us. These are our experiences, so we naturally take them home with us. But from the reflection, we go through this process of knowledge creation. We're saying, we got the solution. Now, that solution worked because. That means whenever this happens, that will happen. We go through an analysis. We think about the situation, the experience, and now we're taking out the core relationships, the logical connections, what caused what, and how are they linked, and how are they related. Now we can use this knowledge when we encounter a similar situation in the future. We have the application of knowledge. We have the knowledge, so now we apply it in the future, and we have learnt from the experience. We start with some experience, some lived experience, and now we've got through to the application of knowledge. In similar circumstances in the future, if we encounter a similar situation, we have something to draw on. We have the previous experience. Now, Kolb's experiential learning style. Well, according to this view, we start with a concrete experience. We encounter some situation and we have this experience. It's a real life experience. We then reflect on the situation. We think about it because we've perhaps solved the problem. We've looked at the experience. We've looked at the situation that arose. We know why it arose because we've thought about it. We've looked at solutions. We've rejected some solutions or some possible solutions, and we've picked others, and finally we've worked out the best solution in this situation. Now we reflect on it. Why was that the best solution? So we are in the process of analyzing it. And once we've gone through this reflective observation, we conceptualize it. We put it into our heads, and we think, whenever that situation arises again, whenever we see something happening and something else was likely to follow, we know what to do. We have conceptualized it. We have a model in our head. We have something in our head which will help us to solve the problem if it arises again in the future. But of course, if we can, we try to test our theory. We experiment. We in situations in the future, if we can, we say, we have an idea of how this worked and how we solved it and why it worked. So now let's try it again, if we can. If it's possible, let's perform the experiment. Let's do it again and see if the same solution works. And we will do this as often as we can, because the more we experiment, the greater our knowledge, the greater our confidence in our knowledge. So we have gone in a circle. This is the learning cycle. We go from active experimentation to the concrete experience, starting to do it again reflecting on it, again conceptualizing it, trying to work out exactly what the relationships were, and again experimentation. Now let's go through these, go through the four components, and let's start with concrete experience and just have a few words about what we mean by concrete experience. Concrete experience is the initial starting point of Kolb's cycle. The individual's learning begins when he or she undertake an activity. So it starts logically with some activity, something that needs to be done, something that needs to be completed. There is an activity. So it's a very practical and concrete starting point. The idea of concrete experience assumes that the undertaking must be carried through in order to learn effectively. So the concrete experience has to be worked all the way through. We can't just observe something that needs to be done and simply observe it and walk away. This needs to be done, and we need to figure out how to do it. So it requires active involvement. We need to get involved with the situation and to work on it, to see how to solve the situation, see what the relationships are, what are the complexities, how do we solve these. So it's a practical situation that needs solution. But for a simple example, say driving a car is heavily dependent on concrete experience. In order to learn to drive, the person should experience driving a car. Imagine trying to learn how to drive a car by reading a book. Well, the book will actually tell us exactly how to drive the car. But it's far preferable to sit in a car, sit behind the wheel, and to learn how to do it in that way. So, concrete experience, very important in this form of learning. Now the second part of the cycle was reflective observation. And this stage of the cycle emphasizes reflection and making judgments based on what's been observed. So we observe the situation, we have this situation we're looking at, we observe it, and we start to make judgments. We start to analyze the situation. We start to look at the situation. We start to look at the various components and how they're linked and what's causing what. So we're starting to make judgments. The process enables individuals to step back from the activity and observe what is happening and analyze how they are progressing. So we have the experience, we're trying to solve it. It's a good idea to stand back a bit and think about it. Sometimes if the problem is complex and we can't solve it immediately, as I said earlier, we have it in our head. We have the problem in our head. We have studied the problem. We haven't found a solution, but we've just studied the problem. Now we reflect. And this reflection can take place at any time. It can take place quietly over a cup of coffee. It can take place on the bus on the way home. It can take place any time. We are trying to solve a problem, and the problem is, it's a practical problem, it's a situation that's arisen, and now we're reflecting on it. We're looking for a solution. Take an example. After a driving lesson, the learner will think about what has happened and how he or she would have reacted under certain situations. When we have an experience, let's say you're learning to drive a car, you may make a mistake. You may hit the curb or park the car badly. Now, later on, the chances are you will think back about that experience and start to analyze. Why did it go wrong? What happened? What did I do that was wrong? We're reflecting on the experience. Now we've got abstract conceptualization. Well, this stage of the model involves the use of concepts and theories that will build a foundation of what is being learnt. So abstract conceptualization is when we get to the stage where we think We know how to solve this problem. We have reflected on it. We've had the experience. Now we've reflected on it. We know the solution. But why does the solution work? What links the various components, and why does it work when we do whatever it is we do to make it work? Having reflected on it, we found a solution, but why does it work? We are now looking for a model. We're looking for a theory that will help us to solve this problem should it arise again in the future. We have a theory of how this thing works, how this problem can be solved. Concepts and theories will facilitate what's been observed and reflected upon. The concepts and theories really encapsulate the solution. They contain the solution. They are the outcome from the reflection. The experience, the issue was resolved by reflection, by thinking about it. Now we're trying to work out what's the theory behind this. How does it really work? What's the relationships that are going on here? For example, when learning to drive, the learner will normally have prior knowledge of what is an accelerator, brake, gears, clutch, etc. So when we get into the car, when we're learning to drive, we have a good idea of what the accelerator is. We have a good idea what the brake does. So we don't just get into the car and be overcome with all of the gadgets and all the pedals, and we know the design of the car. We've worked it out. And we've had the experience of sitting in the car. We've reflected on it. We've thought about it. We've become comfortable. The fact that in front of us is the steering wheel, and the pedal on the bottom, one of the pedals will be the brake, and we understand this. We've reflected on it. We've got a deeper understanding of the design of the car. And the abstract conceptualization means that all cars will be designed in this way, more or less. So when we sit in a different car, we'll expect to find the various controls roughly in the same position. We won't be too surprised by the design of the car. It's an abstract conceptualization. So when we say car, we know where the steering wheel will be. We know where the horn is. We know where the brake pedal is. So we're not too surprised. We have an abstract conceptualization. So when we see a practical car, without getting into it, we know what it's like. Now we move to active experimentation. Well, active experimentation is the process of applying learning to practice. We've learned from an experience, we've reflected on it, we've now got an abstract conceptualization of the problem. Now test it. Going back to the example with the car I just mentioned, perhaps check in various cars, is it true that the pedal is always on the floor? Is it true the brake pedal is always on the floor? Is it true that the steering wheel is always where it says it will be? And is it true that the lights are somewhere on the dashboard? So check it. Test the theory. The learning that takes place can be translated to different situations or revised to better handle a situation. The learning that takes place needs to be internalized to an individual's needs, and then can be only then can the learning be useful to an individual. So the individual puts the learning into him or herself. It's internalized. It's in their brain. It's filed away. And whenever confronted by a similar experience in the future, the person is able to draw on the solution because they've met that situation, roughly speaking, in the past. They've reflected upon it in the past. They've conceptualized it in the past. They've got a theory, and now they can bring out the theory and apply it and see if it works again. For example, as your skill level and confidence develops, your driving will improve. You follow what has been learned, and you are more inclined to take risks to further develop your driving skills. This doesn't mean you're dangerous. It just means you are testing the car. Perhaps you're on a quiet road and you want to see what will happen if it's a gear car and you let out the clutch too fast. What will happen to the car? It'll jump forward, perhaps. Or what will happen if you apply the brakes very rapidly? You want to test your understanding of the car. Hopefully you'll do all of this within a safe environment, and there'll be no risk to anybody else or to yourself. But by and large, we tend to test what we know. We know something to be the case. We like to know what are the limits of what we know. So we're always in the process of experimentation. The experimentation can be very small scale around the home, just trying out something different. In work, it could be varying the process very slightly to see if there's going to be a change in the outcome. But we do tend to experiment. Now let's talk about transforming experience. According to Kolb, knowledge relies on grasping experience and then transforming it. So we get the experience, the very practical experience, the situation we're trying to solve. Then we solve it, we think about it, we reflect on it, and we conceptualize it. So now we've moved from the very practical into a theory in our heads about this situation. So it's been transformed from very practical to a theory. According to Kolb, the central idea here is that learning, and therefore knowing, requires both a grasp of figurative representation of experience and some transformation of that representation. So we need to know what the situation is when we have an experience. We need to know, here's the problem, here is the situation we're confronted with. We need to know all about it. And then we need to reflect on it. We need to find a solution. Then we conceptualize it. So we've moved from the very practical into a theoretical situation. Now in future, if confronted by similar circumstances, we have a theory which we can test. And that becomes a bit like experimentation. In order for our experience to be meaningful, we need to reflect on it or use this experience to further develop the learning process. So this whole process, this Kolb learning cycle, we start with a situation we're trying to fix, perhaps a problem we're trying to solve. Having assessed the problem, we need to reflect. It all revolves around reflecting. It all revolves around problem solving, about thinking about it, about trying to resolve the issue. Now, this may be done by talking to others and by having discussion groups, or it may be done in our quieter moments. As I said earlier in this session, it could be resolved by just sitting there reading the paper or having a cup of coffee, and suddenly it will dawn on you. Suddenly you have a eureka moment. You have this moment where you think, I understand what happens. I can solve it. So that is the situation that pertains in the Kolb learning cycle. That is the essence of the Kolb learning cycle. That's all we really need to do on the Kolb learning cycle. That's I suppose that's the way in which learning in business is broadly conducted most of the time. Many of the situations in business are unique, perhaps unique to that particular company. the company makes a particular product and will have particular issues, so that the knowledge base of the company is the product of reflection. And that's why it is important in business. That's all I'm going to do in this session. I'm going to leave it at that. There's just some references that may be useful if you see them online. And that's all we're going to do. So thank you for watching.